was never about Mike and Chris. It was always about Urs and Mike. Chris had it hands down. Coach Jason Capson here. All right, let's jump right into this video today, folks. We're going to talk about the battle for second place at the Olympia for men's classic physique, the battle between Mike and Urs. We're going to go pose for pose, basically the same as I did for the Open Olympia with Hadi and Samsung. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it between Mike and Urs because I actually think the battle was really for second place. If you look at first place, Chris Bumstead, it wasn't even close. Chris won hands down almost every single pose, if not every single pose. But I think if we look at Urs and Mike more closely, and again, I know they had Mike and Chris standing side by side, and they had only the two of them, battling it out. I don't think it was actually a battle between Chris and Mike. I think it really was ultimately a battle between Urs and Mike, or at least it should have been. So we're going to break it down. Pose for pose. Let's start with the front double bicep pose. So as you know, as a bodybuilder, you start from the ground up. You take it from the feet, you take it up to the legs, you go all the way up into the upper body, and then you go from there. Now, if you take a look and you look at the cross striations, Urs obviously had better legs from the front. I do think, and we'll see this in the other poses, I do think Mike had better legs from the side. But the front double biceps pose, I think it is very clear that Urs does have the better legs from the front. I think his shoulder to waist ratio taper is really good, but Mike is really incredible with his proportions. I think Mike kind of came out of nowhere. I know people were watching him, but I don't think anybody expected Mike to finish second. I certainly wasn't, that's for sure. But it was a pleasant surprise, and I'm glad he was there to kind of push everybody to the brink. I think Urs brought an incredible package, but this pose in particular, I think they both have the equal biceps. I think they have equal chests. I think Mike's shoulder to waist ratio, his X frame, that X frame factor as they call it, I think it looked really, really good. I think it might have been a little bit better than Urs, but I think Urs just overall with the size and with the legs, I think he wins the front double biceps pose. Now again, let me know what you think in the comments below about each and every one of these poses. Let me know what you think about this video. Is it the right thing to be doing? Should I be comparing Urs to Mike, or do you actually think that the comparison should be Mike versus Chris? Do you think Mike beat Chris in any of the poses? I went through them. I certainly don't. I think it was closer between Urs and Mike than it was between Mike and Chris. But the front double biceps pose, I'm going to give this pose to Urs just because of his legs from the front and his size from the front. Next up, we've got the front lat spread, and I know Mike's is off to the side a little bit, but we did see, the front lat spread from both competitors. And again, I do give the legs from the front to Urs. I think Urs really brought the conditioning, but man, it was really, really close. I think again, because of Mike's taper, I think Mike has a smaller waist than Urs did, but I think Urs definitely had more size. He's a taller competitor, so that does give him a little bit of an advantage. But I'm going to tell you, Mike really, really brought it this year. And the other thing too, Mike is an incredible poser. He really knows how to pose. I think Urs's poses are really well done as well. I think he's a great poser. I would go ahead and say that Mike is probably a better poser I'd say Mike is one of the best posers in classic physique. I think he's right up there with Chris Bumstead, maybe even a little bit better. When you look at their routines, I think Mike really brought it during the routine round. But again, if you look at this, I think again from the dimensions, from the symmetry, from the polish, conditioning, I think Urs brought better legs from the front. I think his conditioning was a little bit better from the front. I think Mike does have a better taper. So again, I think I have to give this pose from the front to Urs. Again, I'm interested to hear what your opinions are, and if you really do think Mike won this pose, tell me why. Why do you think Mike won the front lat spread? And why do you think Mike won any of these poses? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But for me, the front double biceps pose and the front lat spread pose, I think both of those poses, I think they both go to Urs. Next up, side chest pose. And forgive me for this photo. I'm not sure what happened to Urs's head in this photo. This is not a very good shot from the side. I do think Urs was in better condition than what this photo represents, but this is the only one I could find. I do think, again, as I mentioned earlier, that Mike does have better legs from the side. I like Mike's conditioning on the side. I like his hamstring. His glutes look better. I think his chest is definitely thicker from the side. I think it's a very close pose, but again, I gotta say too, and not that this should matter, but it does matter, their tans. Urs messed up his tan at night. He looked white when he got up on stage for the night show. I'm not sure what happened there, but somebody messed up, and Mike's tan looked really, really good, spot on under the lights. But from the side, I think, again, because of the leg, because of the thickness of the chest, his arms look great, striations. I think you see his serratus a little bit more clearly. I think he's just in better conditioning from the side. I think this pose goes to Mike. And next up, we've got the back double biceps pose. I used to tell all of my athletes, male or female, that most shows, bodybuilding shows, are won from behind. So you cannot neglect what the audience sees from behind. And I think both of these men clearly showed up and understood that the back poses were going to make a huge difference. And again, I do have to say that Urs did improve dramatically from the years before, but again, as a judge, you're not judging based on how much they've improved. And let's be honest, if that was the case, Mike would have won the whole show, because he was definitely the most improved bodybuilder probably in the entire Mr. Olympia. I don't think there was anyone. I know, Samson won. Hadi looked incredible. Derek looked great. Chris looked great. Urs looked great. I think Urs improved a lot, but I don't think there's anyone that could argue that Mike improved the best out of any bodybuilder that night. I mean, he came really from nowhere to really solidify second place. I think he won second place, even though had Urs gotten second place, I don't think anybody would have been upset. Because if you look at this back double biceps pose, Urs, there's a lot of density there. There's a lot of great separation. His glutes look fantastic, striated, his hamstrings, his calves. This is a really, really good pose for Urs. But when you look over at Mike, I think Mike equally. He's got great thickness. He's got great width, lots of separation. I think their biceps are pretty much identical. I think Mike's glutes are definitely more conditioned, more striations. I think he needs to work on his hamstring pose a little bit from the back just to give it a little more pop. But I do think overall, when you look at this pose specifically, I do think Mike wins it again because of that taper. He's got the smaller waist. He definitely has a thick back. Could he use some work there? Absolutely, like everybody, but I think from the back, you got to give this one to Mike. Next up, we've got abs and thighs. And here is where you can see that Urs's waist is a little bit thicker than Mike's. Mike's waist was nice and tight. He's got tiny waist, and his abs and stride. He was really, he owned this pose from the front. And again, all the other poses, I think Urs won it from the front double bicep, the front lat spread. But I think this ab and thigh pose, I gotta give it to Mike just because of the conditioning of his abs, because of the size of his waist. Here you can really see the feathering and the conditioning, cross striations and separation in his quads. I think that Mike really pushed Urs here again. Urs just has such great muscle bellies and great separation, but I do think his waist is a little bit thicker here. I don't think it's crazy. It's certainly not like some of the open men bodybuilders who, well, let's be honest, they've really brought it together. They've really brought better packages over the last couple of years in the open bodybuilding. There's not as many distended bellies, big thick waists. He certainly isn't Wesley Vissers. He's certainly not going to lose any points from a blocky waist standpoint. But again, I think Urs does have a thicker core, thicker waist than Mike. I think Mike just brings that classic tiny waist to the table, and I got to give this pose, abs and thighs, to Mike. Next up, you've got an interesting pose here, the twisting back pose, the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger pose. I don't think anyone does this better than Chris Bumstead, but they both gave it a shot. And I do have to say that this pose, actually, Mike should probably take this pose out of his repertoire. I think that Urs did this pose very, very well. Shows a lot more thickness. I think it's just the way he's twisting his body. It just looks more classic. It just looks better. Now, again, in fairness, I don't know if Mike is completely into the pose. I believe that he is, but you could see from this comparison, at least, that Mike is holding a little bit of water. This might have been the morning show picture, but he's holding a little bit of water where Urs looks very, very tight. Again, I wish Urs would fix that tan, but it is what it is. Urs definitely wins the twisting back pose, and I think that Mike I think Mike can bring it up for sure. But I think for this pose on this day, I think you got to give this one to Urs. And last but not least, we've got the most muscular. Now they hit two different most musculars here. Urs hits the standard crab most muscular, and then you've got Mike hitting the, I guess, today's standard most muscular. I actually like this one better. The crab pose, only so many people can get away with a crab pose. There's very, very few. Most of them have to have their hands on their hips or their hands together, like Mike is showing there. It shows off all of his great lines, his abs, his shoulders, his legs, everything. I think that this one, just because of the way the pose is, and they're not the exact same pose, I have to give this one to Mike. It shows much more definition, much more separation, muscularity. I think the most muscular pose in this case definitely goes to Mike. And again, at the end of the day, Mike won. Mike finished second. He beat Urs on this day. That's one of the things I love most about bodybuilding, is that on any given day, someone is going to win and someone is going to lose, and you can have a contest a week later, and if it's close, it could be vice versa. I think this is the case. I think if you put these two back on the stage next week, if they stayed in condition, of course, and you put them on stage next week, and you have a different judging panel, you're probably going to have Urs beating Mike. And again, this is what's great about next year's Classic Physique championship for the Olympia, at least. It's really up in the air because you have Ramon Dino, who has been sort of the heir apparent to Chris Bumstead over the years. He's kind of fallen behind a little bit. Now you've got Mike making a surge. You've got Urs looking the best he's ever looked. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think Wesley is out of the... I think he's done as far as the Olympias go. He might show up again at the Arnold Classic and win again, but I think the Olympias made it very clear that they're not a fan of Wesley Visor's physique. So I think next year it's going to be between Mike and Urs and Ramon Dino. We'll see what happens. Again, it could be, things can change between now and then. There could be somebody brand new that comes out of the woodwork that would give all three of them a run for the money. The same way that Mike just sort of appeared and took over where Urs and Ramon historically have been. So kudos to Mike for doing it. Is he the next Classic Physique champion at the Mr. Olympia? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think he nailed his prep for the Olympia. I think he brought a complete package to the Olympia. I think he was deserving of second place. I think this was actually a closer race between he and Urs. I think Mike and Urs was the actual battle. It wasn't Mike and Chris. Chris won that hands down. But I think we'll see what happens next year with all of these guys. And I really do love what's happening in Classic Physique. I think the changing of the guard was due. I think Chris Bumstead could have easily won 10 years in a row if he really truly wanted to. There was no one close. There was no one coming up that was really going to give him a run for his money. I think Chris retiring for now. We'll see what happens in the future. It's going to be interesting to see where he lands. But I love what's happening in the open bodybuilding as well. I love what's happening in Classic Physique. I was going to say I love what's happening in the bodybuilding world, but right now there's a lot of drama in the bodybuilding world. I don't know if you're following all the stuff on the interwebs, but there's a lot of drama going on with coaches. There's drama going on with with social media fitness influencers and gigantic men throat punching them. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. That's a video for another day. But for today, I want to wrap it up. This has been a great video, and I think, you know, the Urs versus Mike comparison is something we're probably going to see into the future for many, many, many years to come. That's it. That's all. Take care, guys. Coach Jason Capson, signing out.